recording on. And we still have a host that's missing, but I guess rather than wait for him, we could start.
Greg was on the other link, and I was trying to suggest to him that we switch over to this one, but his signal was breaking up and we couldn't communicate.
Oh, there's another link. That's odd.
Well, at the last minute, I asked if you wanted me to send a link, and someone, I think it was Greg, said send a link. So I sent a link, and then he went on that. But if you have a phone number for him, maybe you could, I don't have his phone number.
Ah, okay.
You can go put it in our little Signal group chat, Albert.
Yeah, definitely.
Is Greg on that?
Yeah,
Yes,
we have like a
he
little
is.
Signal chat between us.
And I will also email it to him as well. Let's see here.
His signal is pretty bad. Someone might want to phone call him.
I just sent Russell a message and he just saw it and he's messaging me back.
Okay.
Russell Brooksbank. So I can see that he's typing. So I was like, where are you at? PLLC Zoom. He probably forgot. There he is. He says, that's the interview. I'm out buying drugs. He means medicine.
None of my business.
He's not. I think he's been sick. He forgot. I think it's because he's not been feeling well.
Okay, I just sent him the link again. Let's see.
You sent it to Greg?
Yes, uh-huh.
Mike, are you still planning on going to Indianapolis on March 1st? It's a Friday night.
Yes, I think it's in Fishers.
Yes, I will be there at the candidate reception. I'm running for lieutenant governor for the state of Indiana, so I will also be there with you at that time.
That's great. I'm looking forward to seeing you. A statewide race in Indiana is always very exciting.
Yes, well, Donald Rainwater's running for governor, and we're hoping to have a Rainwater Hudson ticket. So we'll see how it goes because the delegates vote. So I'm hopeful I'll come out on top, but you just never know. So I'm not taking it for granted.
No, we never know any of these things in advance. Are there other candidates for governor and lieutenant governor?
There is one for governor, and her campaign manager is running for lieutenant governor. But for Donald Rainwater, it looks like a slam dunk for him. So
people are
he's
used
not
to
taking
him.
it for granted either. I mean, we're both out talking to the delegates and the members, and making the rounds and stuff. And our opponents are not. Not just not engaging at all. So what we're hearing is that they just wanted a platform to say some things, and they're not really running seriously. So
is this Tommy Brown and
yes,
and
Rhonda Green?
Rhonda, I've met.
Yeah, Tommy Brown is Rhonda Green's campaign manager.
Yes.
You know him?
Yes, I know Tommy. Yeah. And I've met I've interviewed Rhonda as well.
Yeah. Tommy's nice. I mean, I know them because when I ran for Congress, they were in my district. And so I got to know them and I got along with them just fine, So but we'll see how it goes at the convention.
Well, good luck.
Thank you.
Okay, well, I think okay, somebody else decide to join, I think we can probably get started. Hopefully, Greg will
That's
be able
fine.
to.
Did anyone get a hold of Greg on the phone?
I texted him and also sent him an email. So he had asked me for the link. I hadn't seen it, but I replied back. So hopefully he gets it and he can join us.
Okay, that's great. Well, thanks for doing this. Thanks for your time and letting me join you all.
Yeah, thank you very much for agreeing to be part of our series. We have interviewed 3, I believe, right now. Oh, there he is. Greg has joined us. So, okay.
Hi, Greg. I'm sorry that you and I were unable to communicate on the other link. The signal was breaking up. Maybe that's still the case.
Yeah, work this. There you go. Okay. All right. Success. Okay. All right. Hello, everyone. How are you?
Hi,
Can you hear
Greg.
me?
So
Yeah,
we
hi.
can, it's great that you were able to finally get through. So,
Yes.
okay, I think we can start our
Absolutely.
session here. So as I was saying, we've interviewed a number of the LP presidential candidates, and we have one more after this, and possibly others. But the purpose of our get together between representatives of the Pro-Life Caucus, the Christian Caucus, and the Center for Natural Law is to discuss your view of the campaign, of the current situation, and how you see libertarian policies and politics affecting, especially, I guess, the areas that we're more concerned about. And obviously, we come from a libertarian perspective on foreign policy, economics, but we might have maybe a different take on some social issues that some other libertarians take. So we want to more delve into those areas, but also ask some general questions. But before going there, I'd like to give an opportunity for each of the groups to present their reason for existence and why they're interested in this session and in the presidential election. So why don't I start with Kara Smith and with the Christian Caucus.
Thanks, Albert. Hi, Mike. Thanks for joining us. Appreciate
Take
your
care.
time. So if you want to think about the reason for the Christian Caucus existing, it's for, Christians that want to do work for liberty where we feel like it overlaps with Christianity. You can come into the Libertarian Party and find yourself, table topping at a Pride Parade or a sex work is work event. And it's like, I don't know if just anywhere is the best place for a Christian libertarian to be focusing their efforts on liberty. So we want to focus on things like defunding Planned Parenthood is a lobbying push we had recently, things that are important to Christians that we think are important for God. And that also includes another thing very important besides things like supporting candidates that align with us and lobbying and things of that nature. We also are very interested in the voluntarism side and being of service ourselves, as well as supporting things that kind of fill in the gaps where the state has its dirty claws. So that's kind of our purpose, and it's nice to come together. We have a nice Discord channel where we do everything from support each other in prayer, share about Bible studies, talk about theology, have discussions, and talk about different things for, lobbying candidates, talk about things, stuff like that. So that is a little just snippet about us, what we're doing. And we're happy to be here and have a chance to, throw a little bit of our weight around with candidates to show that Christians are paying attention. And, we're a we're a population in the party, believe it or not, that is to be contended with. So thank you for your time and for being here.
Thank you. That's great.
And I didn't make that emoji. I don't know why he keeps doing that. I wasn't even touching it this time. So
Well, it's better than a different emoji. At least it was
yeah,
a thumbs up.
that's true.
It'd be awkward if you were giving yourself a thumbs down.
Okay, Greg, you want to introduce yourself and talk about the Center for Natural Law?
Greg Lapointe here. I have the Center for Natural Law, and I'm just now starting the Natural Law Academy. We promote the natural law, and the natural law is really the philosophy, the science, actually, that establishes and validates libertarianism as the most appropriate political system for human beings and for families and communities. It rails against or describes the difficulty that socialism brings. Natural law exposes government as really as a secondary association. It's not a primary association. Our families, communities, jobs, those are primary associations. Government is a secondary association. So natural law, politically speaking, establishes libertarianism, among other things.
Okay, let me say a few words about the Pro-Life Libertarian Caucus, which was formed before the 2020 convention, LP National Convention. And before 2020, the focus of pro-lifers for many conventions before that had been to abolish the abortion plank. But that effort had always ended up in failure. In 2020, Russell Brooksbank, the chairman of the Pro-Life Caucus, moved to have the plank abolished, and it did not succeed. It only garnered 45% of the votes. But in 2022, after some time of organizing and also talking with other caucuses, that effort was very successful. And so as a result, over 65% of the delegates at the last convention voted to abolish the abortion plank. And the caucus's goal is to solidify the trend of the Libertarian Party in a more pro-life direction. And I'll just read from our preamble, which says that the Libertarian Party stands for the protection of the rights of the smallest minority, the individual. We cannot think of an individual that needs more protection than a preborn person. So we believe that a pro-life stance is the correct stance for the Libertarian Party. We strive to move the culture of the Libertarian Party towards that stance by supporting candidates for party leadership, nominees to public office, changes to our party platform, and education of fellow members. So in a nutshell, that's what the Pro-Life Libertarian Caucus is about. So just like to open up the floor to you and for you to give a brief background of yourself, why you're running for president, and what you hope to accomplish.
Sure, I appreciate that. Let me move very quickly through those things because each of you said something that makes me want to respond, and I'd like to save enough time to do that. I think most everyone knows what it is that we're trying to accomplish here. Obviously, I think everyone in the Libertarian Party would agree that we have a huge opportunity in 2024. And I think that we're all on the same page with regard to why that is. Objectively speaking, the likely nominees in the Republican and the Democratic parties are odd, weak, they don't poll well, and this is one source of the political opportunity that is before us. But it also needs to be said, I believe, that our government has gone off the rails and has gone off the rails in ways that I think the American public is increasingly recognizing as a bent toward authoritarianism. And for this reason, I believe that the faults in terms of public policy of our government especially at the federal level, play into our wheelhouse as libertarians. That's another reason why I think we have a big opportunity in 2024. Having said all of that, and we could probably spend a couple hours on why it is that we have an opportunity, I think more important than that is I'd like to make the point that we have an obligation, we as libertarians, particularly as the Libertarian Party. We have an obligation because our government has gone off the rails and because it seems increasingly clear by the month and certainly by the year that it is not likely that a Republican or a Democratic politician is going to lead the charge back toward a constitutional democracy, back toward a republic of delimited powers inside of our Constitution, in the direction of anything that you might call a limit of scale and scope of our federal government, whether you call that fiscal conservatism or whether you call that a federal government that stands up for nothing more than our rights. It's just not going to happen. And I think that a lot of us over the years, I would argue at least over the past generation, possibly over the past 2 generations, have maintained some semblance of hope that a Republican or a Democrat would move us in that direction. And I don't think it's going to happen. So in that sense, it's up to us, libertarians, with a lowercase l, and possibly only with a capital L inside the Libertarian Party, as the philosophical descendants of the people who put together our Constitution, who wrote the Declaration of Independence, who put together our government, and who did so for only one real legitimate reason, which is to stand up for our civil liberties, to protect us in some sense, in the very limited ways in which we decided to put a government together to protect us. It is up to us to lead the charge back in the direction of a constitution. We live in a post-constitutional nation. And I believe that this is part and parcel of what it is that has let loose our government to go off of the rails. Indeed, I believe that by the middle of the century, it is likely that unless there is a significant course correction, the federal government of the United States is likely to fail. And there are a number of ways that could happen. I won't try to prognosticate about which one is more likely, whether that's a fiscal collapse, whether that's in some sense a civil unrest, or whether that's because of a world war. But I do think that it is up to us to impose this course correction. I believe that we have an opportunity to do so in 2024, to begin that process. But to begin that process, I think that we need to run a campaign that is very different from national campaigns, presidential campaigns the Libertarian Party has run in the past. I think that we need to do a couple of things differently. Number one, we have to run on a platform that is unapologetically libertarian, that's very principles forward. I think that we've missed opportunities to do that in the past. I think that we have, as a matter of marketing strategy, missed the boat by defining ourselves in the context of the other parties, rather than cleaving hard edges against the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. I believe that it is the right strategy to run on a platform that leaves absolutely no doubt that there is no possible mistake, that we are a completely different choice. I believe that that is the right thing to do, both in terms of correctly branding our party, but I believe it is also the right thing to do in terms of reaching as many people as possible, to reach as many voters, donors, and media as possible. The other thing that I think that we need to do very, very differently than we have in the past is run a very, very credible campaign with a great deal of professionalism. You probably all know that we've put together a pretty sizable team already. We have 17 people on our team that we pay a little bit of money, most of them not very much, of course. We have a very professional team. We're ahead of schedule in terms of our development. We will be very, very ready by the time the nomination takes place. I wouldn't argue that we're ready today, but we're ahead of schedule and almost ready. I think as anyone would agree who's looked at our social media, so looked at our websites, we work very, very hard at preserving our credibility. We back up everything with a great deal of detail, with plans. We lean very hard into my own personal background in public service and public policy. I was a professional economist for more than 2 decades, I worked for the White House for a couple of years. I've taught economics at 3 different universities. I had my own business educating bankers and other financial services executives. And I spent almost a decade in Washington advocating for greater competition, for freer markets, for a less regulated financial services industry and other related industries. So I've been around in terms of federal public policy and state public policy. And in my second career, I worked as a police officer for 11.5 years until a couple of years ago. From the age of 49 to the age of 60 in Broward County, Florida. I was on the road the entire time. All as a registered libertarian, which was quite an experience, as you might imagine. It's why I spend so much time today talking about the effects of bad policy at the local level, why I spend so much time talking about the fact that we need to change the way that we manage police officers and the way that we manage police agencies. I do believe that it is important that we preserve, and this is getting a little bit in the direction that I hope our conversation goes tonight. I believe it is important that we not allow our public policy to get out ahead of our culture. That for those of us who have strong feelings, as I know that you all do, for those of us who have strong feelings about the direction our culture is going, we need to fight those battles in the context of culture and not use the government as a tool or as a weapon to help us fight those battles at the same time. That's a tricky thing, but I think that that's part and parcel of what it means to be a libertarian and part and parcel of what I plan to put forward as part of my campaign. I hope that makes some sense to everybody.
Yeah, thank you for that. Kara, would you like to start out and ask any questions you might have?
Yes.
Yeah, I could start out. Thanks for your introduction to things. Just off of your introduction, I even just had a couple questions. Maybe you could just elaborate a little bit further on a couple things. So let's start with just even the last thing. So not having public policy get ahead of culture and not using the government, would this have to do with like the order in which we're dismantling the state? Or are you talking about actually like libertarians that might want to implement laws? Or what did you mean by that last sentiment that you were expressing?
A lot of us are disappointed with the direction in which our culture is going. And a lot of us are willing to do almost anything to change that. But it's important as libertarians that we recognize that it has to be almost anything to change that. Public policy is necessarily downstream from culture, and it has to be. It must be. When we, for example, criminalize things that our culture is not ready to give up, we create black markets. This is where black markets come from. And black markets are exceedingly dangerous, typically more dangerous than the underlying cultural problem that the public policy was meant to repair in the first place. For example, the war on drugs is out ahead of our culture. Things that we do at the border are out ahead of our culture and out ahead of our ability to control the situation. This is why black markets exist. And they're very, very dangerous. The war on drugs is very dangerous to people who use drugs. Our policy at the border is very dangerous to people trying to come into the United States. So it's important, in my view, that we recognize the public policy is downstream from culture. To the extent to which we're disappointed by our culture, we need to do something about that. But that's not the same thing as doing something about that using public policy.
Right. So you're talking about like prohibiting things with laws, prohibiting things we don't like. Would you, what do you think about gender affirming care for minors though? Would that be something that we need to wait until culture? Because I mean, not long ago, that wasn't normal in our culture. I mean, probably a little more than 5 years ago, that wasn't a huge thing. But that is definitely widely pushed and accepted in culture now. So that something that shouldn't be pushed back at on a policy level also?
I don't know that that it is widely accepted today, by the way, but that's a statistical matter. I think that there's more smoke than fire in some aspects. My own personal view, notwithstanding, I do believe that we need to allow individuals to determine at a state level that an age of consent should apply, that an age of consent needs to be reached. What we're talking about in this context is a deeply personal decision with long-term permanent implications. For this reason, I believe it is the type of decision that must be made by someone who can weigh in on every aspect of that decision. What are the alternatives? What are the risks? What are the benefits? What are the long-term implications? How do I pick a doctor? Is my doctor an idiot? These are decisions and aspects, I believe, that can only be made by an adult. As a culture, we demand that our state enforce some sort of age of consent for all things under the general rubric of sexuality. I believe that this needs to be treated the same way.
Okay, so you do think that there should be an age of consent factored in to making the gender treatment decisions. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
All right, that was something I wanted to ask anyways, and when you talked about not using,
and I think that that's consistent with our culture.
Mm-hmm. Well, for some people, I mean, what's going on in schools is very different. I mean, I have family members and friends that teach, and I could tell you what's happening right now in schools from people's direct experiences, not that, that
I'm painfully aware.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So it is, I would say, once it's something that's like enforced in schools, it starts becoming part of the culture, in my opinion, just because the schools have such a monopoly on education.
I agree. I would also argue that what's happening in schools that you refer to is largely happening in public schools.
Right.
And yep. Therefore I would categorize it as public policy. I think that our public policy in this area is out ahead of our culture.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
Yeah, and I've got a problem with that.
Yeah. Oh, me too. Okay.
However, by the way, however you feel about it, I could feel completely different than I do personally, and I would still make the same argument that we shouldn't have public schools out ahead of culture. We shouldn't have public schools pushing a particular ideology about anything, even things that I agree with.
Right.
I mean, everybody knows in our culture that the Chicago Cubs are the greatest franchise in America. But that doesn't mean that I want our public schools convincing kids of that. It's my job to convince kids of the reality.
Okay. Could you expand a little more about the border? You kind of touched on it briefly, and I'm just curious on what you think is the main problem and what you think the best way to address this, both with policy and even your general messaging around that issue, what it is.
Sure, I appreciate that. Look, a couple of different things can be true at the same time about our border, and a couple of things need to be said virtually simultaneously. Number one, first and foremost, it's important for us to recognize that immigration is good for the United States. Immigration is one of those things that has defined America over the past couple of hundred years. It's one of those things that differentiates us from other modern democracies. It is part and parcel of our culture. It is good for us not only culturally, it's good for us economically. It's not only good for us economically, but it's good for us fiscally. As long as, states do something dumb like pass out free money that, certain states are trying to do at the moment. Having said all that, there is a difference between legal immigration and illegal immigration. And one of the big differences is that illegal immigration is extremely dangerous. I spent a couple of days at the border in Arizona last year, and I can tell you the extent to which the human trafficking condition is ongoing every day, every week, every month, every year is absolutely heartbreaking. Most people who come into the United States come in illegally. Most people who come in illegally use some form of human trafficker, some form of coyote, some form of gang on the Mexican side of the border. And in most cases, they're handed over to someone whom they do not know on the United States side. By the way, someone that the gangs and the coyotes don't know either. But typically, both sides of the border, people are being trafficked by people they don't know. And all too often, they wind up sold into some form of indentured servitude. I realize this is an adult program, but I'm not going to delve into every aspect of how dangerous this is. You can use your imagination. Police departments down there, sheriff's offices down there, find it, as an aside, difficult to control the deputies who will do almost anything in many cases to stop this, even when they're told to stand down. That's how personally abhorrent this practice is of human trafficking. And I believe that our inability to get a hold, to get control of our border is leading to a black market that is extremely dangerous. It's a bad look for the United States. It's a bad policy. It's absolutely unethical. If there's anything that we would want our federal government to do, it is to protect people coming into the United States for the first time. So I do believe that it's important we get control over the border. But that has two different aspects. One is discouraging people from coming in illegally and protecting them from being trafficked across that border. The other is making it much simpler and faster to get into the United States legally. Much of the reason there is so much illegal traffic is because we can't handle, with the resources that are dedicated to the situation, we can't handle the demand for immigration legally, and that needs to be repaired. There's no reason why, technologically speaking, there's no good reason why we can't increase the flow of legal immigration, and it is good for us.
Thank you. I could go more into that, especially because I'm in San Diego, so this is like a huge issue here. But I wanted to just switch up to a different question so we can keep moving. And one thing that you talked about was, instead of, being a candidate that talks within the context of the Republicans and Democrats, that you wanted to make hard edges, and kind of really distinctively show how we're a different choice. And I just think I can't really think of an example, and I haven't been around the party that long, so at least this slate of candidates, I don't see, unless I'm misunderstanding somehow, I don't really see candidates doing that. So I don't know if you could explain that a little more. And then to piggyback that, you talk about not getting ahead of culture, but yet being bold and principled, despite, what the main duopoly, which is kind of where culture is. So how do you rectify that is the other part of my question.
The first part, I think that the other candidates have done a pretty good job of being out there with a platform that is fairly principled. But to give you an example, I think that the United States population, I think most Americans are ready for a real anti-war message that would starkly differentiate us from the other parties. I think that it's not enough to talk about being fiscally conservative. I think that this is a race that will be defined by those who have the courage to say things that I think most Americans would recognize to be true, but that the politicians don't typically feel like telling you. For example, Social Security is evil. It is the truth. It needs to be said. The idea of recruiting youngsters into a program that's going to cost them relative to what they could have made had they invested their money on their own over the course of their lifetime. It's going to cost them hundreds of thousands of dollars per person. And the reason that we recruit people into this program is because it was so badly designed that we keep having to recruit people to fund the bottom half of the Ponzi scheme so that we can make payments to the top half. That's an ethical problem. That's not just a math problem, right? Many politicians characterize this as a math problem. It's not a math problem. It's an ethics problem. And we need to find a way, politically speaking, to stop not just recruiting young people into this system, but forcing them into this system. We can't have it any longer. Similarly, go ahead.
Oh, no, I just had another question ready to go, but if you had more to go, you can continue.
Well, I was just going to mention that, you know, the way that we talk about foreign policy and domestic economics is very different, but the way that we talk about monetary policy is different as well. Republicans and Democrats will tell you they don't like inflation, right? We say the reason we have inflation is an institutional level problem. That's why we believe that we need to replace the discretionary style of monetary policy we have in the United States and get rid of the Federal Reserve System and institute a completely different regime for controlling our monetary base to make our currency stronger, to make the dollar harder. We also believe that we need competition among currencies, not only to challenge the dollar, but to allow markets to develop the way they should in the future, especially through blockchain technology. So there's very, very different policies that the Libertarian Party believes in, that I personally believe in, that we need to push very hard as a matter of differentiation. I think it's a failure of marketing 101 to go out there and say, as our candidate did a half a dozen years ago, to say, I'm socially liberal like a Democrat and fiscally conservative like a Republican. That's a mush mash. That's not something that needs to be said. By the way, it's not even true. So it's just one of those things that shouldn't be said. We need to show people why we're different, not seek common ground with their politicians.
That makes sense. Thank you. So I have a couple questions. I have two more, if that's all right, Albert, that have come from people that have submitted stuff. We've kind of covered some of their questions already, which is good. So I don't have to feel like I'm just sloughing those to the side. And then actually one is a pro-life one that I'll let Albert get to after. One person asked, what would you say to those who say libertarian views are anti-Christian because they don't support government social programs? So I'm assuming this means talking obviously to people outside of, the Libertarian Party, where, like how people call libertarians selfish and this and that. Of course, anti-Christian is another one they use.
Christians do not call on the government to do their lifting for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right. Okay, thank you. And so someone had a question. Now, I'm not as familiar with your timeline of when you were doing what professionally, but something about COVID lockdowns, when people were being arrested on the beach. And if you were a police officer during those times, how could you justify your libertarian principles with being a part of the agency that's enforcing these types of things?
Well, I was in Florida, particularly in Broward County, so we weren't actually arresting people for being on the beach. I don't know if that was an exaggeration or a question. There was a period of time during which the governor wanted beaches cleared, and we did pass out notices, but that's about where it left off. There was a time when the police department was asked to pass that message, and we did pass the message, but that's about as far as it went. Once in a while there would be a standoff with our leadership, but not too often, and typically our police department backed down when the officers had a problem with some of these things. So it didn't turn out to be all that contentious, but I was fortunate to be in Florida. I was fortunate to work for a good agency. For example, our agency had a different group that handled vice issues. I didn't have to be involved in the drug crap, and I didn't have to be involved with, a traffic unit or anything like that. I didn't have to be involved with prostitution stings and stuff like that. My job was to be on the road and respond to calls for service. So I had a good job.
Okay, thank you. I feel like I gotta get to a lot, and maybe if there's time at the end, I could ask more, but I do appreciate you guys letting me have a lot of time. So thanks for all your thoughtful answers, and I'll let Albert take over again.
Well, I appreciate that. Carrie, you had said something in the beginning that caught my attention about pursuing issues where Christianity and libertarianism, I think you used the word overlap. Maybe not. I don't mean to read too much into any particular word, but I did want to share with you how I sort of see this, because to me, it's not so much a Venn diagram concept. I don't mean to suggest that that's what you were saying, but to me, this is more of a hierarchical stacking of philosophy. And this goes to the second half of your question before the last one. To me, Christianity is that on which we build our lives. Libertarianism is an aspect of that. Politics is an aspect of that. Government is an aspect of that. But that has to be built on top of a foundation that is more rock solid than how you feel about government in particular. And in that sense, I don't look so much for overlap as much as I look for a philosophy toward government that's consistent with what's more important to me. And I think that it needs to be said that our government overreaches, period, full stop. That a government that overreaches in one aspect is a government that will overreach in others. And so it is important that we push back on all of them. To me, it is important that we push back on every way in which the government overreaches. The object needs to be to pare back government, to make room for the rest of our lives, to make room for what is actually our true religiosity, not this fake religiosity that the government has become in our culture. So in that sense, I don't mind pushing back on a government that overreaches in prostitution. I don't mind pushing back on a government that overreaches in bodily autonomy, even in the area of drugs. These are not areas that I would suggest I'm happy about culturally. But because the government overreaches in these areas and simultaneously, consistently overreaches in other areas, I do believe it's all part and parcel of the same beast, and that we need to push back in general. Does that make some sense?
Yes.
Yeah, I would say that what I mean is, if you imagine, I'm sure you've realized this, running for president, there's only so many hours in a day. And there's certain things that are definitely more important for me to focus my energy on, because I'm a mom of 3 and I have very limited time. So I think I don't mean like I believe in criminalizing sex work, even though I find it abhorrent, or that drugs should remain criminalized. That's not what I was trying to kind of say. Like, I'm not trying to say I only want to find liberty for the things that I find culturally valuable. What I want to do is focus my efforts on the things that I think are the most important. And that's why we just did an effort for defunding Planned Parenthood, or we were helping make calls for defend the guard, peace and, saving the baby, stuff like that is very, very important. There are things that, because of that foundation and faith, that have more urgency, I think. And also, while it is important to push back against the state on all things, like you mentioned, I think because some of those things, we have a problem with them in the culture, and it's bad for our culture. I think it's equally important that while we push back against the state, that we try to build, help and alternatives for people, and build the strong communities. And so, so like it wouldn't. So there's just different types of libertarians. Some libertarians, it's like sex work is work, and we want to like push back on the government, and we want it to be culturally accepted. And for me, I'm like, let's not put people in cages for victimless crimes, and let's try to build stronger communities and families so that people don't fall into that line of work. So that's kind of where I'm coming from, and I hope that clarifies it a bit, because I think you like the way I kind of breezed through it in the beginning. It might have seemed more like I'm only for liberty in certain areas, but hopefully that clears it up a little bit the way I just explained it.
I think that's well said. And no, I didn't presume that you felt a particular way. I just wanted to make sure that you understood how I approach it. Thank you.
I understand. Okay. Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing your thoughts on that, for sure.
Okay. I'd like to circle back on a comment you made about immigration, and other libertarian candidates that we had talked to had a position that immigration should be on an invitation basis system. What do you feel about that?
As a practical matter, that means closing the border. So I want that to sink in first, because the context of this conversation matters. That's what that means, right? I just want to make sure we're all on the same page.
Mm-hmm.
It's a nice thought that you would be able to bring in millions of immigrants every year based on them being invited, and based on individuals inside the United States, or organizations inside the United States who would take responsibility for them. I think it's wonderful to the extent to which it would happen, that people would invite people to come into the United States. I think that's a good thing. But to suggest that that would be the only way you could get into the United States is effectively saying that we would close the border down to 2%, if I had to guess, of the rate of immigration today. And I've got a problem with that. I've got a problem with effectively shutting down immigration. Immigration is good for the United States. And I believe that we need a more pro-immigration policy. We need a more pro-immigrant policy, which is different. We need to treat with greater dignity the people who are coming across the border. And that means shutting down the idea that they should come in illegally and be trafficked across the border. That is not healthy. It's not safe. It's not good for the United States. It's not good for these individuals. And I appreciate the fact that we all want some vetting of people who come across the border. I think that that's wholly appropriate. But to accomplish that, we need to dedicate a little bit more technology, and we need to redeploy assets from the rest of the government to help us do that in a reasonable and responsible way.
Okay. So if I understand your position, you do believe that we need to get control over the border so that people can't just willy-nilly cross the border and use coyotes and just be able to go through a porous border, but you'd be in favor of more immigration on a legal basis, and not just on an invitation basis, but also other reasons people could immigrate as well. What would be some of those other reasons?
I don't think that there should be a reason. I think that if you want to come into the United States, that you should be vetted and allowed into the United States. I don't believe in this idea of discriminating against people who want to come for economic reasons. I think it's one of the best reasons to come to the United States. In fact, if you were outside of the United States and you didn't want to come to America, I got to question that. I got to say why. Why is that? Why do you not want to come to America? I think that our government should be in the business of recruiting, not shutting it down.
Okay, then to put it on its head, what would be the reasons not to admit someone to the United States?
I think that we're in agreement, culturally speaking, that we're not interested in clearing people through, that we have established are members of some terrorist organization or who have some felony warrant in their own home country. But that's about it.
Okay. Currently, I mean, we effectively, I think, have an open border currently. But not only that, but we're also subsidizing immigration, and the INS is basically paying for their transportation, food, medical care, and everything else. And my personal opinion is that with all the subsidization, if it were ended, you'd have a lot of immigrants not come because this is an incentive, and you're basically encouraging people just to come across the border. Do you think that that's the main problem with the current immigration?
No, I don't. I do agree with you that it's a waste of money. We should not be incentivizing people to come across the border. But having said that, the vast majority of people who want to come to the United States do not come to the United States because of the incentives. They come to the United States because where they're coming from sucks by comparison. That is clear. Having said that, I think our current situation is worse than an open border. An open border would be less dangerous. I'm not in favor of an open border. But to your point, people coming across the border today find a much more dangerous situation than an open border because of the human trafficking situation, which exists only because we've created a black market. We make it illegal, and then we do a crappy job of shutting it down. So people feel like they have to either, swim the river or climb a wall or come in the dark or use human traffickers. These are all dangerous, much worse than an open border. So I do believe that we need to vet people through, but at the same time, that means stopping the illegal immigration, which is so dangerous.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, thank you for that. I'd like to move on to abortion. And do you think that the decision of Roe versus Wade was a government overreach, federal government overreach? And what do you think of current proposals, even by some libertarian candidates, to codify Roe versus Wade?
Well, however you feel about abortion, I'm glad that you started out with Roe v. Wade. Roe v. Wade was technically speaking, an incorrect decision, an unconstitutional and anti-constitutional decision. Roe v. Wade was decided for all of the wrong reasons. However you feel about abortion, whether you're, pro-choice or pro-life, which I think are exaggerations of people's positions typically. But however you feel about abortion, Roe v. Wade was a mistake, and the decision itself says so. Sandra Day O'Connor explicitly thought it was a good idea and said so every chance that she got. Thought it was a good idea to suppress states' abilities to make law in this area themselves. She thought it was a good idea to unify law across the United States. I think that's a horrific understanding of how our Constitution is supposed to work. Having said that, states, yes, are going to have to decide where they want to be in terms of abortion. And again, however we all may feel about abortion personally, I'm not going to be able to hide the ball on how I personally feel about abortion. But having said that, states are going to have to make up their mind. I don't believe it's appropriate for state law to get out ahead of culture. And where our culture is means that neither of the apparent endpoints on that scale are going to be tolerated. People in no state are people going to tolerate a law that says abortion is okay up until 2 minutes before delivery. That's not going to happen.
Well, actually, I think that is the law in New York and in some other cases, some other states.
It's a little bit more complicated in New York, which is the most insane. There have to be reasons. And in answer to your implied question, I don't think it'll be tolerated. I think that New York will be pushed back over time. I also think it's the case that in no state are people going to tolerate a law that says the moment of conception, abortion is going to be illegal. However, you and I may feel about that. I don't think.
It seems like there are certain states that have adopted that. I believe Indiana has, and Alabama and some other states.
Indiana does not have a law that says you can't get an abortion.
I live in Indiana and I can comment on that.
Go ahead.
Okay. Abortion is illegal in the state of Indiana with a couple of exceptions. It's very, very hard, even with the exceptions, to get an abortion in the state of Indiana.
It is hard. It is hard. The exceptions were meant to be more broad than I think most people would agree they're turning out to be. And I think that for this reason, in the long run, that law is likely to change over the next couple of years. I think in the long run, where states are going to wind up is at some point along this spectrum, and each state is going to have to decide. And look, this is an empirical matter. I don't mean to suggest that I'm, a political savant that knows exactly how each state is going to come down. But I don't think it's likely that states are going to pick one point or the other. I think that all 50 states will end up at some intermediate point along the way. But however you feel about it, everyone has a personal opinion. I happen to feel very, very strongly about this. But having said that, state legislatures are going to have to pick a point along that scale that is consistent with what their popular culture is going to tolerate. It is up to us who have strong feelings. I'm out of the game in 2024 because I'm pursuing public office. But for people who have strong feelings about this, it is naturally up to us, up to you all, to try to affect public culture in a way that moves the needle, that moves culture in a particular direction.
Yeah, and I think various states are doing things differently. In Florida, they just recently passed the 6-week law that bans abortion after 6 weeks. And then other states have different deadlines
Right.
in which to get an abortion, and some are earlier, some are later. But and presumably those laws reflect the culture, because otherwise they wouldn't get the popular support for re-election. But do you believe that it is appropriate for each state to make those kind of decisions based on their culture?
I would prefer these decisions be made as locally as possible. Certainly the federal government has no role, legitimately speaking. We need to keep the federal government out of it. So in that sense, yes, states making up their mind is a hell of a lot better than the federal government making up its mind. It would probably be more appropriate at even a more granular level, although I respect the fact that at some point it's administratively nonsensical, but we do want these decisions to be made as locally as possible. By the way, even the 6-week rule in Florida, a lot of folks don't expect to hold up over the next couple of years, but we'll see. Each case is going to be a long-term project.
Yeah, you alluded to your personal opinion on this. What is your personal opinion?
Look, I don't like abortion. I need to be careful here. I'm seeking public office, and it's extremely important that anyone who can hear my voice understands that I have no interest in allowing the federal government to get out ahead of our culture.
Okay. I did, peruse your website, and one of the things you said on the website is that no government shall have authority to inhibit access to abortion prior to viability. So I think from your website, I'm deducing your opinion. Is that correct? Is that what your opinion is?
That's my opinion on where public policy ought to be in terms of allowing our culture to play out. It's not my opinion about how I feel about abortion. That's a public policy position. You didn't ask me how I feel about drugs, but I do believe they should be legal.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So, but I mean, like, I guess what I'm trying to get at is, it seems like from a personal point of view, you might believe that abortion should be permitted before viability. But on the other hand, we talked about the states and how the states can regulate this. But do you feel that your personal opinion should be the policy of each state?
I believe that each state is going to have to make up its mind. The people of each state are going to have to make up their own mind.
Okay.
Was that your question?
Well, reading from what I read on the website, it seemed like some sort of codification of Roe versus Wade, but I'm hearing from you that it's not, that you don't want the federal government imposing on the states that they have to allow abortion after
right. I believe we need to keep the federal government out of it completely. And I don't like the idea of states getting out ahead of people and creating black markets either.
Okay.
I do have very strong feelings in this area, but that means that we need to push culture in a certain direction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
what I don't like is those of us with strong feelings using public policy as a tool to do so.
Mm-hmm. But it really depends on what you view the role of government as whether you believe that the government should enforce the non-aggression principle and whether the preborn baby is an individual entitled to such protection. And that's the gist of, where people come from. And if you do take that position, then it's very logical to use government, because that's the purpose of government, to restrict abortion, to not allow doctors to perform abortions, with certain exceptions, such as the life of the mother. And so that's a very logical position.
And indeed, I believe that that's where we will be in certainly in 100 years. I don't know how long it will take, but I do believe that we are living through a relatively brief period of time. I believe that eventually we will succeed in moving our culture in that direction. It is lamentable that we're living through this period of time, but living through this period of time, we are.
Okay, moving on to libertarian politics. What do you think the position of the National Libertarian Party should be on the issue of abortion and also state libertarian parties?
I think that the LP National should have a position that says the federal government has no role.
Okay. Well, currently it doesn't have a position. Do you think that's an acceptable situation?
I would prefer if there were a plank in the platform that said the federal government, explicitly said the federal government should have no role.
Okay. But just limited to the federal government.
Yes.
Okay. And how about, okay. And then so state libertarian parties could take one position or the other depending on the culture of their state. Would you agree with that?
I believe each state libertarian party should also have a plank in their platform that says the federal government should have no role.
Okay. But what about state policy?
Well, I think that they can, certainly that they can push But like I said, I just don't like the idea of using government as a tool to drag culture one direction or another.
Okay. Um,
Albert, you're right. I am not a Republican. You're right.
yeah, I'm not a Republican either, but you know,
No, I know you're not. But you know, this is an important element of libertarianism in my personal view. My personal view is that I need to do a clean job of separating my personal views about certain of these issues and public policy.
yeah, and I think you're dead on many of the things you said about drugs and about sex work and things like that. But you know, when it involves a human being, you know, you have to take a different take on it. But in any case, we can move on to other things, and just wanted to give the floor to Greg, for if he has any other questions.
I do have a few questions. Just commenting on that, you know, ethics and government really cannot be detached from one another. Any law must conform to natural law ethics. And so the only response I would have to that is that pro-life is one established, the position is established by logic and reasoning. And that's where ethics comes from, much to the surprise of a lot of people, that it comes from, you know, they think it comes from scripture or some other sacred text. I'm not preaching. I'm here to ask some questions, but I just want to comment quickly. As a libertarian, I very much am pro-life, and I think it's established by reason, and that's the foundation of libertarianism as well. Pro-life and libertarianism go hand in hand, in my view.
I don't disagree with the philosophy.
Yeah.
I'm just arguing that no matter how much you and I agree on that, and everything you just said, I agree with.
Yeah.
That does not imply using government to codify that.
I understand. Yep. The government should protect lives, but I understand what you're saying. You want to keep government out, and that certainly is a central fact.
And, and let me be more clear, because I don't like the language of I want to keep the government out of it, because it sounds like per se pro-choice. What I'm saying, and this is different, what I'm saying is I don't want government to get out ahead of the culture and create black markets.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So for example, if there were, there is no example like abortion. Because in some sense, you know, the drug war is not completely analogous.
Yeah. Yeah, we would be irresistible. We would take over American politics if the libertarians would join ethics and libertarianism. No one could beat us. Those two are the secret components. Libertarianism without ethics, and I'm not saying your position is unethical necessarily. Pro-life is the ethical position, but ethics and
pro-life is the ethical position.
Yes, it is.
And when we succeed in impressing that upon our population, we will be prepared to codify that.
Yeah, very good. Okay, I have about 4 categories, and I think I don't want, is Jessica, right, in Indiana? I want to leave you some time, so I'm going to kind of condense my questions. So one question I have is this. With regard to Republicans and Democrats, would you say they really, truly ought to be viewed identically? So I'm going to join another question to that. If we had it our way and we got rid of the Republicans and Democrats, would you suggest that we should have a one-party system, the one party being libertarianism? Or if not, if there were to be a second party and the Democrats and the Republicans were out of the picture, or maybe not, depending on your answer, you can include one or the other, but wouldn't a two-party system, just because of the debate, just as long as it's a healthy competition, tends to generate better answers? But once we establish libertarianism as one party, who would the second party be, if any?
I think that Go ahead.
if any?
I think that the right answer is that we need more parties in the United States, not fewer.
Including the
not-
Democrat Party?
Say that again, I'm sorry?
Including the Democrat Party? Isn't the Democrat Party far too close to socialism, on its way to leftism, on its way to communism? Don't we just have to nix that party?
Their philosophy sucks. Their public policy positions suck. That doesn't mean that we want to nix the party. And maybe I don't know exactly what your verb implies by nixing the party. If this is a public policy discussion, no, I don't want to take public policy to get rid of the Republican Party, the Democratic Party. I think that those parties are doing a fine job of self-destructing in the long run themselves. But we do need to change the way, first of all, the way the US public views other parties, as well as ballot access rules so that other parties can rise up and challenge. We need more parties in the United States, not fewer. Part of the problem that we have is that we only have two major parties. And we know where authoritarianism comes from in a democracy. It comes from some politician abandoning what had been his or her prior agenda and adopting as a number one priority, keeping the other idiot out of power. And so this is in a democracy when some ostensibly lowercase d Democratic politician stands up and says, what you really have to fear is not the loss of your civil liberties, but what you have to fear is that other party taking over. I'm here to protect you from that.
Yeah.
This is very difficult to institute in a party system in which you have more than two parties. It's one of the reasons why it's so important to have multiple parties.
Would you say, or who would you say, seems to be closer to the Libertarian Party, even if it's incrementally? I mean, are we closer to the Democrats philosophically, or closer to the Republicans philosophically, or neither?
I think that each party in its past has had aspects that make a valiant argument for its historical value. I think in the past, you were able to say, you could bump into an anti-war Democrat. You could bump into a fiscally conservative Republican. You could bump into Democratic politicians who stood up for your civil liberties, who would stand up for your First Amendment rights. Certainly, the Republican Party still has individuals who will stand up for your Second Amendment rights. Each party has a history of adding value in that sense. But if you join the Republican Party for some of these reasons that I just alluded to, you and your party have gone in two very, very different directions. And I would say the same thing about the Democratic Party.
Yeah.
And so in that sense, go ahead.
No, I apologize. Go ahead. I thought you were done, but go ahead.
In that sense, each party has gone through profound change, but both of them in the direction of increasing authoritarianism.
Okay. Many of your comments about the immigration could have been spoken by a Democrat and less likely spoken by a Republican. Just an observation. And I have another observation about the
I don't know that I would accept that.
Okay.
I don't think you're going to find too many Republicans who stand up and say, as the first sentence of their answer, immigration is good for us.
Legal immigration, I think they say that. But it's...
I don't think that they do.
Well, okay. All right.
They say it's acceptable.
Okay. Something I'll pay attention to. I do think there's politicians that want to just shut the border down to take a breather from this onslaught. I will tell you, I'm in Denver. And so, as you may have seen in the news, Denver is one of those cities that's experiencing a lot of problems. I have a company that works with illegal immigrants, and I can tell you that there is a definite educational problem with immigrants. And I have often said to people that if I were in charge of Mexico, I would establish schools all over the place, all levels of schools. I encounter people here in Denver that may not have had any education whatsoever, may have never sat in a desk at all, not first grade, not second grade, others that may have got to fifth grade. There's no education. That does impact this culture. I would also point out that actually, if there's a long list of negatives, whether it's burdening our tax system and our all sorts of governmental pressures, healthcare, educational issues where these immigrants are flooding our schools, it impacts the veterans, it impacts low wage income earners, et cetera, et cetera. That's just a side observation I want to make. My experience of illegal immigration is very, very negative, and that's because of my company. I get letters from immigrants and they don't even know how to address an envelope. I mean, there's an educational factor that I have noticed that is really shocking, actually. I mean, that they don't know how to do the most basic things, and that will impact our culture. I think third world people think and act in third world ways. I'm sorry, I apologize. I don't mean to be, it's just a response to what you had said earlier. Here's my question regarding illegal immigration. I don't think it's, I think it's a perfectly valid comparison to ask somebody if they have a lock on their front door. And the reason you have a lock on your front door is you won't let even a street person or somebody in need walk through your door, walk to your refrigerator, make a sandwich, take a nap on your couch. You want to invite them in. And you did say vetted. You want them to be vetted. So was there anything you wanted to add to that? I mean, do you think it's the libertarian position just to open up the borders and just let immigrants from the rest of the world sucks, if I may say so, with very few exceptions? Maybe Europe, maybe Japan. Most of the world is impoverished. Is that sufficient reason for just to let we're a wealthy country. It's just the way it is. Do we just let them all in? Because the rest, 2/3 of the rest of the world lives in poverty and we don't? I'm sorry, that's the question. I apologize for such a long question.
No, okay. It's okay. No, I don't think it's analogous to say we should shut down our border because we would want to lock our front door. That's not what we're talking about, and I frankly reject the analogy. Immigration is good for the United States, and it has been good for us culturally and economically for 200 years. It is true that most people who come to the United States come from impoverished nations, both because that is what the rest of the world looks like, as well as because that is much of the incentive to come to the United States for opportunity. It is just factually not true that people come to the United States and take from our economy. Historically speaking, in places where states don't just pass out free money, you and I are on the same page with regard to not passing out welfare checks and not allowing our states to run down public money spent on illegal immigrants or even legal immigrants. We're on the same page there. But it is not true historically that immigrants cost us, in some sense, more than people who are born in the United States. That's a very, very important distinction.
Okay. My next question has to do with violence and self-defense. Especially as a police officer, you defended the vulnerable. You defended people in need who couldn't defend themselves. Women, children, other men in situations, the elderly. Can't we, here again, make an analogy if a adversary attacks a country who is a friend of ours? You can pick any country you want that's a friend of ours, that's unjustly invaded. How do you feel about that? Should the United States go and defend that country militarily?
No.
A friend.
I heard
a trading partner. Okay.
No. What would be the argument in favor of it?
Defending the somebody in need, the vulnerable, the innocent, a tyrannical regime. You pick the tyrannical regime. They just want additional land. They want to take over a country that has minerals or some kind of wealth. They do it, and the people are unprepared, and they simply are getting slaughtered and enslaved.
Okay, so the argument would be, in some sense, a charitable act. There is a difference between charity and forcing on people, in this case, the citizens of the United States, to give up their resources in order to effectively send abroad. I don't have a problem with people that want to participate in foreign wars, that want to send their resources, that support other people around the world. I think that that's fine. There is a stark difference between that and a government imposing itself on our citizens to do what it is that those citizens would not do on their own. Because that's what we're talking about. We're talking about using the rule of law, using the government's monopoly on force to require people to give up resources in order to send abroad. I've got an ethical problem with that.
So you're just advocating for a voluntary military?
I am advocating for a voluntary military. Absolutely.
In that case, it's okay. It would be okay to go abroad.
For whom to go abroad?
Well, the voluntary soldiers, the military, the voluntary military that, you know.
If you would like to volunteer to fight for another cause abroad, then that's fine. Is that what you mean?
I understand what you're saying. In other words, our government should not fund that effort in any way. They are welcome to go abroad and fight for that government abroad.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's what.
But I've got a problem with taking resources from people across the United States, including, in many cases, people who can least afford to give up resources, to take those resources by force and use it to either acquire arms or to fund personnel, to fund an intervention, or to prop up someone else's effort. I think that that should be an ethical problem for us.
So we should defend our shores only.
By we, you mean our government? Yes.
Okay. Our country, our shores, our boundaries.
Right. But when you say we, I assume you mean our government.
Of course. Yes.
Okay. Yes. Yeah. I think that our government should have very, very limited power, very limited authority. One of those is protecting our border and protecting us from foreign invasion.
So hypothetically, if a evil Adolf Hitler was successful and literally conquered the rest of the world, maybe even in conjunction with another evil empire, and there were one or two evil empires, we would be very, very vulnerable, wouldn't we, if we never helped anybody abroad? That's the last question on that.
I don't know. That's quite a complex hypothetical. There are situations in which it might be in our national interest to stop the spread of evil or violence someplace forward of our border if we really thought that it was coming our way, or if we thought it was, you know, going to rip our lives asunder. But that is what I would include under the rubric of protecting us. No, I don't think that protecting us is a rubric sufficiently broadly defined to say that we should be funding Ukraine, that we should be funding Israel, or that we should be funding Taiwan.
Okay, two more questions. It has to do with the agencies. Vivek Ramaswamy made the point when he, as president, he would readily sign executive orders to fire 75% of the administrative state. Department of Education, Homeland Security, all of them. How do you feel about that? I mean, we are hyper-regulated. You said that in the beginning, I believe, or you alluded to that, which I totally agree with. How do we dismantle that? How do we start dismantling the administrative state?
There are some things that you can do in certain ways and some things you have to do in different ways. He is exaggerating the flexibility of the executive when he says he can dismiss 75% of personnel. But having said that, I'm sure his heart is in the right place. I don't like standing up for Vivek Ramaswamy's heart, because I think that he manipulates his policy to fit his personal objectives. But you can winnow down a great deal of the personnel that is employed by the administrative state. Importantly, there are other things that you can do to limit the reach of the regulatory arm of the federal government. For example, you can, by executive order, make much of federal regulation subject to the approval of governors in each state. This can't apply to every regulation, but it can apply to quite a bit. So, for example, you could make, for example, regulations regarding nuclear energy. This is one of my favorite examples. Subject to the approval of a governor. Now, this might not have a great deal of effect in a place like California, where the current governor loves regulation and I have no doubt loves the imposition of federal regulation as well. And even if there were no federal regulation, he would impose just as much himself unilaterally. But it is likely that there is at least one state out there with a governor who would say, I'm going to take advantage of this flexibility and reject, pursuant to this federal executive order, reject the imposition of this regulatory framework in my state. And I'm going to develop a state framework that invites investment into my state for the development of nuclear energy. We do know, after all, that nuclear energy is the likely future of the development of energy in the United States. I would love it if a governor were to come out with a package that said, you dot the I's and cross the T's and find the financial backing, we can give you a permit to break ground in 18 or 24 months on a nuclear reactor by rejecting the federal regulation that holds us back. The other things that you can do at the federal level are break up agencies administratively, even if you can't do it through legislation. The FBI is a good example here, where you can detail out personnel to other agencies. You can't fire them all, and you can't sunset the FBI without legislation, but you can detail personnel out to other agencies. And I think that Americans would be surprised how easy it would be to live without an agency like the FBI.
Last question. Us libertarians have slight differences, as you know. Myself, I believe libertarianism is a bit utopian, and I believe that it probably correctly or aptly applies 70% of the time to various political issues and situations. I believe libertarianism can apply to 70, 80% of the various practical political situations that occur. Do you agree with that? And if so, how are we supposed to take care? What supplements libertarianism, if anything? Or it's not utopian in your view?
I don't believe it's utopian in my view. I believe that libertarianism is a very practical way of looking at the way our government should work. As I mentioned earlier, I do believe that we are the philosophical descendants of the people that put our Constitution together. It is also true that the Constitution was put together with a great deal more optimism than turns out to have been justified. The Constitution is a document that has been in no small part left behind by the ages. And we need to fight our way back to that. But fighting our way back to that is a fairly practical endeavor. You had mentioned at the onset that you view the recognition of natural rights, natural law, as a scientific matter.
Yes.
I believe that science, correctly viewed, can be considered a bit of philosophy itself. So I'm not sure how important it is to draw a distinction here. But let me say that I do believe that you can come to libertarianism from either of two very, very different directions. One is, as I personally came to libertarianism originally, 30 years ago, which was as a fiscally conservative bank economist, right, who believed that the world would work better, that our economy would work better if we would allow people to make decisions for themselves. That's what I would call coming to libertarianism from the right-hand side. But I think it's also important to recognize that you can come to libertarianism from a very different angle. And it wasn't really until around the time that I became a police officer that I came to view this other approach to libertarianism as actually being much, much, much more important. And I would like to illustrate that with the following example. Imagine that socialism worked. Imagine that we were wrong about socialism. Imagine, this is tricky for we libertarians, but work with me here for a moment. Imagine that Mises and Hayek were wrong, that the government could actually process information and make decisions for us that are better than the decisions that we could make ourselves. Objectively speaking, this is a thought experiment. In such a world, would the government have the ethical right, the moral authority to make decisions for us? And I believe that the answer has to be no. That it is for us to live out our lives by our own standards, by our own guiding light, according to our own faith, according to our own ethics, come what may. And I believe that it is not only a matter of natural law that we should have this right, but I believe that in some sense, because of faith, it is our obligation to live out our lives in this way. It is up to each one of us to seek our path, not for the government to seek a path for us.
Very interesting thought experiment, and true in several ways there. I will just say this: philosophy, correctly considered, is natural philosophy and the natural sciences. It's that natural part that connects them. Very good. Thank you for all your answers. I appreciate it.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Greg.
Albert.
Okay, I have a follow-up based upon your foreign policy, the foreign policy discussion we had there. What I'm getting from you is that you would probably favor a policy of non-intervention based upon George Washington's example and how he did not believe in entangling alliances. So what would you say about the alliances that we currently are engaged in? Like, for example, the Taiwan Relations Act, NATO, other types of entangling alliances that we're in, and how would we move away from those alliances if that's what you would like to do?
There's a lot to unpack there. In a word, they stink. And I don't think you have to go back 250 years to George Washington to make that point. There really are not examples that the American public would point to and say, gee, that military intervention was a good idea. Notwithstanding the billions of dollars that we spent, notwithstanding the thousands of lives that were lost, it was still worth it. Those examples really don't exist. However you feel about the ethics of the matter, and I've got an ethical problem with our foreign policy, but however you feel about the ethics, empirically speaking, strategically speaking, the federal government of the United States is simply not good at using military interventionism to achieve long-term objectives that the American people would agree are in our interest. And by the way, in the case of Afghanistan and Iraq, it's not just billions of dollars that were lost. It was trillions. And it wasn't just thousands of lives lost. It was millions. Now, I don't know whether you count that as an ethical problem or an empirical problem, but I hope that there aren't too many people on this planet that would count those as examples of something that we should be pointing to and saying, that's a reflection of a successful policy. Our policy is not successful. And so in that sense, I think there's an extra layer of an ethical problem on top, which is to say, we are taking money from people around the United States, again, forcibly, and spending it on a policy that doesn't work. However you feel about the ethics of war itself, we're blowing money on a policy that doesn't work. So, in answer to your question about the alliances, I think that we need to send the signal, and as soon as possible, to our European friends. I know the word friend was used earlier. Not sure exactly what that might mean in certain contexts, but a friendly phone call is in order. This is your 18-month heads up, for example. If you believe that it is your nation's interest to remain fearful, I would argue paranoid, of the Russian army, notwithstanding what we have learned over the past year in Ukraine. What we have learned is that the Russian army is utterly incapable of overrunning Ukraine. Notwithstanding all that, if you believe it is in your interest to remain fearful of that army, then you do you. But whatever had been your plan B, it's now your plan A, because the United States is no longer going to be your plan A. If you believe it is in your interest to spend 2%, 2.5%, 3% of your GDP defending your borders, then you better start doing it. Because it is not an ethical proposition for us to continue to take resources from the American people and spend it on being your plan A. In the South China Sea, I think it needs to be said that our policy is dopey. The idea of strategic ambiguity is an idea that doesn't make sense. And I would argue that there is no such thing as a relationship that is made stronger through ambiguity, whether that's a personal relationship or foreign affairs. But in foreign affairs particularly, success comes from correctly sending the signal about what it is that we believe is in our interest and what it is that we would do to protect those interests. We have accidentally sent the signal. Many politicians have sent the signal without it being an accident, that we will back up Taiwan come hell or high water. And we've been sending this signal for 70 years. This is not in our interest. Now we have gotten ourselves into a situation where many politicians will tell you we have a self-fulfilling prophecy, where we have sent this signal, thereby inviting investment into Taiwan that wouldn't have otherwise been made. Investment into, in particular, manufacturing, more particular technology, more particular chips, and more particular the high-end chips that we believe that we will need to back up our supply chain for the burgeoning AI economy. And now politicians feel like, well, now we have to back up Taiwan because of all these investments that have been made. Investments that would not have been made had we sent the signal in the beginning of this escapade 70 years ago. That Taiwan was whatever Taiwan is going to be. It's not up to the United States to decide by virtue of recognition whether Taiwan is an independent nation or not. I would send the signal to investors. If you need to invest in a place where the United States military is going to back it up come hell or high water, can I interest you in Milwaukee, not Taiwan? And I would tell the PRC that we're not going to be in the business of backing up Taiwan in the future. But at the moment, we want you to stand down. The PRC has an explicit objective to bringing Taiwan back under the fold. It is not true that the Chinese government wants a war with the United States. Now, it might tolerate a war with the United States to get what it wants, but the Chinese government would prefer to take what it wants without getting into a war with the United States. In that sense, everyone can have their cake and eat it too. But the United States has got to be out of the business of accidentally creating these self-fulfilling prophecies. In the case of the Middle East, we should not be backing up any particular player, even a nation to whom we feel as close as Israel. And I realize that it feels more personal in the case of Israel than it does with these other examples. Many of us, I personally have traveled Israel east, west, north, and south. I've traveled Palestinian territory. I've traveled all over the Middle East. We have people on our team with family there. And as though it needs to be repeated, a prominent member of the Libertarian Party announced a couple of months ago that he lost a cousin in the Palestinian territory to the war. This is a very personal, deeply personal conflict that's going on. But that does not mean that the foreign policy of the United States and the foreign policy of the nation of Israel have to be in lockstep, have to coincide, that one has to fund the other. It does not logically follow.
Yeah,
Very
thank
good.
you. Thank you very much for those comments, because as a former colonel in the U.S. Army, I saw firsthand the distorting incentives that our foreign aid create in other countries. For example, in Afghanistan, where I served, the U.S. government and primarily the contractors working there basically helped perpetuate the war in a no-win war, and made the Afghans totally dependent on our hyper technical systems that we were managing, that the contractors were managing. And therefore we made them unable to survive on their own, you know. And as a result, that's why when the decision was made to pull back, they fell so quickly. Whereas if we had left way early, back in 2002, I think the Afghan government that was created then would have had a fighting chance to survive. But we created the downfall of Afghanistan because of our policies. And that's from, you know, my personal experience. So I totally understand your comments, and I totally agree.
I agree wholeheartedly.
So moving on, I don't know, Jessica is our question manager. I don't know if, Jessica, you have any additional questions? So I'd just like to open it up to you. Jessica, are you there?
Yeah, I was gonna ask if there was anything in the chat, but I'm not seeing anything. Yeah, I think we covered everything.
Okay, are there any alibis? Kara, do you have any other comments?
No, that's okay. Sorry, I got taken over by the kids again, so I'm kind of listening in, but kind of getting crawled on by the baby. So I gotta tap out. Thank you.
Okay, well, unless you have anything else for us, I think this is probably a good ending point. So
It's a fine ending point. I would just add that I do believe that for those of us who try to find our path in a life of faith, let me leave it at that. It is important that we engage in public policy debate. But it is important to do so in the sense of limiting the reach of the state. And in this sense, allowing individuals, allowing citizens to lead more ethically full lives, as we earlier described them and as we've touched on, to make room for a more true and authentic pursuit of our faith, of our ethics, to live lives by our own standards. That's part of what it is that we're doing here. And I don't want to confuse the idea, and I certainly don't believe any of you folks are confused. But when I speak to other groups, it's important that we don't accidentally confuse the idea of limiting the scope of government merely because we hate government. The reason we do is to allow the rest of our society to better flourish. I do believe that we are culturally inhibited, and inhibited as a manner of structure of our lives, no matter how you look at it. We look at it as a matter of faith, but I believe that we are culturally inhibited by the extent to which our government has become so expansive.
Very good. I like it.
Okay, well,
Thank you, Greg. I like what you guys are doing, and I'm really honored and pleased to have been able to share this this time with you all.
And I want to thank you for spending so much time with us. And I look forward to seeing you on March 1st in Indiana.
I look forward to seeing you in Indiana. Thanks for that.
Thanks, Mike. Maybe I'll see you in California. I think you're going to be out here in a couple weeks.
I will be there in a couple of weeks with my friend Bobby Kennedy.
Yeah. Nice. I think
Thanks,
you're
Mike.
with him at the VIP table, actually. So that'll be cool.
Oh boy.
All right. Thank you.
so as a
Thanks.
closing note, I'll make the link available to everybody here for your dissemination if you'd like. So thank you again very, very much, Mike, for joining us, and we wish you the best of success in your campaign.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Albert. Thanks for arranging everything.
Okay, thank you.
Take care.
Bye.